Pam Bondi just learned the devastating reality that you cannot outrun a congressional subpoena, especially when it takes exactly 45 minutes for your entire institutional shield to completely collapse. There is a single number at the center of this story that tells you absolutely everything you need to know about where the real power actually resides on Capitol Hill: 45 minutes. That is exactly how long it took between the moment Democrats on the House Oversight Committee filed a formal civil contempt resolution against former Attorney General Pam Bondi and the moment Republicans on that exact same committee suddenly announced that Bondi would appear for testimony on May 29th. Not days, not weeks, not after prolonged legal negotiations, and not after procedural back-and-forth motions filed in federal court. 45 minutes. House Oversight Democrats filed the contempt resolution at a very specific time on the 29th of April 2026. They announced publicly to the nation that Pam Bondi had illegally defied their committee, that she had deliberately skipped her legally required deposition, and that she had refused to cooperate with a bipartisan congressional subpoena. They stated clearly that they were beginning the process to hold her in civil contempt and force her testimony in federal court. Exactly 45 minutes later, Republicans on the same committee announced that former Attorney General Pam Bondi is appearing on May 29th. She is not appearing because she wanted to, not because she had a sudden change of heart, and certainly not because the complex legal arguments suddenly resolved themselves. She is appearing because the contempt process had officially started. And once the contempt process starts moving in one direction, the alternative of May 29th suddenly became significantly less painful than what was coming next. Democratic Representative Robert Garcia immediately said what everyone in Washington understood in that exact moment: clearly, we are being effective. He stated on the record, "It is interesting how it is only when we take action, when we actually have to force Republicans to do anything, to call subpoenas, to get in front of our committee, that they actually ever do anything." Republican Chairman James Comer pushed back against this narrative, claiming that the announcement was made as quickly as they could get the date confirmed. Both of those responses are permanently documented, and what they tell you when viewed together is this inescapable fact: Bondi was not coming voluntarily. The contempt resolution fundamentally moved the calculation, and May 29th is the direct, undeniable product of Democrats filing that resolution and Republicans clearly understanding what came next if they did not produce a firm date. That is the 4-5-minute story. And it is the complete story of how Pam Bondi ends up sitting in a closed-door transcribed interview on May 29th as a private citizen, holding absolutely no office, having no department, and wielding no institutional protection, answering questions she spent 14 months as Attorney General desperately avoiding. This is the complete documented account of exactly how we got here and what May 29th actually represents. Every step, every evasion, every documented statement, and every question that is now waiting for her in that room. No conclusions drawn for you. Just the cold, hard record in sequence as it officially exists. To truly understand the crushing weight of May 29th, you have to understand what happened on April 14th, because April 14th is not just the day Bondi missed a scheduled deposition, it is the fully documented story of an institutional argument that completely failed, and the severe consequences of that failure. The House Oversight Committee had subpoenaed Bondi in March 2026. The vote to compel her testimony was remarkably bipartisan, passing 24-19. 5 Republicans joined every single Democrat to compel her to testify. The subpoena named her personally, not just her office. The formal deposition was set for April 14th. Then, on April 2nd, just 12 days before the scheduled deposition, Donald Trump said, "I think it's time." And just like that, Bondi was fired as Attorney General. 4 words, and 14 months of massive institutional power were gone. The Department of Justice immediately notified the Oversight Committee that Bondi would no longer appear for the April 14th deposition. The DOJ's official argument was that Bondi had been subpoenaed in her official capacity as Attorney General, and that since she no longer held that office, the subpoena was essentially moot and no longer enforceable. That argument was immediately rejected by multiple committee members who had issued the subpoena. Republican Representative Nancy Mace, who had introduced the original subpoena motion, said clearly and on the record, "When I issued the subpoena, we did it by name and not by the title of the Attorney General, so she is still compelled and required by law to come before the Oversight Committee." Democratic Representative Robert Garcia added that Bondi has extensive personal knowledge regarding the Trump administration's handling of the Epstein files, and regardless of her current job title, her testimony and cooperation are absolutely crucial. The committee then reached out to Bondi's personal attorney to discuss the rapidly deteriorating April 14th situation. According to Garcia, who stated this explicitly on the record, Democrats on the committee received zero communication from Bondi's personal attorney, zero communication from committee Republicans, and zero communication from the Trump administration in the weeks leading up to the deposition. Zero communication from anyone about a legally binding congressional subpoena. April 14th arrived. The committee room was prepared and ready. Bondi did not appear. Garcia said afterward, "So as far as we're concerned, we've now spent weeks with zero communication from somebody that was legally obligated to appear." The no-show was not ambiguous. It was not a scheduling conflict, and it was not a legal filing requesting a delay. It was simply not appearing for a legally subpoenaed congressional deposition. The committee's Republican majority, which could have immediately announced consequences or issued a new date, instead simply stated they would contact Bondi's personal counsel to discuss next steps regarding scheduling. That weak response, "We will contact her counsel to discuss next steps," is documented permanently in the record. And it told Democrats exactly what they needed to know about what would happen if they did not escalate the situation. So, they escalated. On the 29th of April 2026, House Oversight Democrats officially filed a civil contempt resolution against Pam Bondi. The resolution was devastatingly specific in what it documented and what it requested. It documented that the committee had issued a bipartisan subpoena to Bondi in her personal name. It documented that the subpoena required her appearance on April 14th, and it documented that she did not appear. It documented that the committee had actively attempted to communicate with her personal attorney and had received absolutely no substantive response. Furthermore, it documented that her failure to appear was not legally justified by the DOJ's argument that the subpoena was moot following her sudden firing. The resolution officially requested that the House of Representatives instruct its general counsel to go to federal court to compel Bondi's testimony. That is a specific, aggressive, and highly significant legal step. A civil contempt proceeding in federal court produces its own documented record, its own legal filings, and its own judicial rulings. It is a formal legal process that, once started, does not simply stop just because someone agrees to show up later. The contempt resolution was filed at a specific time on April 29th. Garcia made the public announcement, calling Bondi's failure to appear an illegal defiance of the committee. He stated she had refused to cooperate and that the contempt resolution was absolutely necessary to hold her accountable. Exactly 45 minutes later, Republicans announced May 29th. The Republican response to the contempt announcement was to dismiss it as theater and claim it was completely unnecessary. The committee's Republican X account posted, "Today, we are marking up legislation to tackle fraud at the federal level, and all Democrats can talk about is Epstein." That response is documented. It characterizes the highly serious contempt process as mere political theater, while simultaneously announcing the very outcome the contempt process was designed to effectively produce. Representative Melanie Stansbury of New Mexico addressed that specific framing directly and brutally. She said, "Listen, Bondi has served as the AG for over a year. She violated a congressional subpoena demanding the files, and she repeatedly, over her entire term of service, as the AG engaged in manufactured lies to the American people over the Epstein case." That explosive statement is permanently in the documented public record. A sitting member of Congress said on the record that a former attorney general repeatedly engaged in manufactured lies to the American people. She went even further, stating that based on what she had seen with her own eyes in the unredacted files, there are dozens of potentially prosecutable crimes and cases in the Epstein files that were never investigated. Dozens of potentially prosecutable crimes simply not investigated by the Attorney General, who has now been forcefully compelled to testify about exactly why. That is the documented context for what the contempt resolution produced. Not theater, but a date, May 29th, and a former Attorney General who finally has to answer questions she has never had to answer as a private citizen. You cannot understand this showdown without understanding Robert Garcia. Garcia is the ranking Democrat on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, representing California. He is the top Democrat on the committee that subpoenaed Bondi, the one who filed contempt against her, and the one who ultimately produced May 29th. His role in this accountability chain has been specific, ruthless, and consistent. He stated publicly that Bondi possesses extensive personal knowledge about the Trump administration's specific handling of the Epstein files. He said regardless of her job title, her testimony and cooperation are crucial. He demanded that the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse deserve answers, and the American people deserve the absolute truth. He noted that Democrats had spent weeks with zero communication from someone who was legally obligated to appear. He pointed out that when Democrats take action, and when they actually have to force Republicans to do anything, things finally happen. He concluded, "Clearly, we are being effective. These are not political slogans. They are highly specific, documented statements about a specific institutional confrontation, regarding specific documents, and specific testimony that has been avoided for specific reasons." Garcia's significance in this story is deeply institutional. He is the person on the committee who pushed the contempt resolution forward. He is the person whose announcement produced the rapid 4-5-minute response, and he is among the members who will have the most heavily documented basis for aggressively questioning Bondi on May 29th. He has been publicly specific about what he believes Bondi's personal knowledge covers the Epstein files, the decisions made about exactly what to release and what to withhold, the heavy redactions, the compliance with the Transparency Act, and the choices made while she was the Attorney General responsible for all of it. These are not broad categories. They are specific, documented decisions made during a specific period by a specific person, who now has to explain them without any institutional protection. Garcia said Bondi has extensive personal knowledge, and on May 29th, that knowledge has to be expressed permanently in a transcribed record. To hammer the point home, Representative Ro Khanna of California, a Democrat and a member of the Oversight Committee, made a very specific historical comparison in an interview on NBC News, Meet the Press, that deserves its own examination. He directly compared Bondi's upcoming May 29th testimony to the relentless testimony of Hillary Clinton before the exact same committee. Clinton, according to Khanna, appeared in a series of photographs released with the Epstein files. Bill Clinton, he noted, had fiercely denied any wrongdoing related to Jeffrey Epstein. Hillary Clinton has stated she never even met Epstein, but Congress relentlessly pursued their testimony anyway. Khanna stated, If we could chase Hillary Clinton, who hasn't been in office for 20 years, certainly we can get Pam Bondi to explain why she covered up documents, why we haven't had prosecution. That comparison is documented. It is highly specific, and it establishes something incredibly important about the legal and institutional basis for Bondi's testimony that goes far beyond the specific facts of the Epstein case. Congressional oversight authority does not simply expire when officials leave office. The capacity to subpoena former officials, to compel their testimony about critical decisions made during their tenure, and to put that testimony into the permanent public record, is a documented, foundational feature of congressional authority. It has been exercised aggressively against officials from both parties in multiple prior situations. Khanna was not making a partisan argument, he was making an institutional one. If the committee had the unquestioned authority and the iron will to pursue testimony from someone who left public life 20 years ago, it certainly has the authority and the will to pursue testimony from someone who was the Attorney General of the United States just 14 months ago, especially someone who was responsible for decisions that are now under active, high-stakes investigation by two entirely separate government watchdogs. Both the DOJ Inspector General and the GAO are actively investigating her tenure. Both investigations were announced in the exact same period as the contempt resolution and the May 29th announcement. The DOJ's internal watchdog formally announced it was investigating the AG's compliance with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Simultaneously, Senator Jeff Merkley announced that the Government Accountability Office Congress independent watchdog would also deeply probe the DOJ's handling of the files. Bondi was the sitting Attorney General during the exact period those specific investigations are examining. Her decisions are precisely what the watchdogs are investigating. And on May 29th, she is going to be in a room answering questions about exactly those decisions. The Clinton comparison is not just rhetorical theater. It is a documented assertion of institutional authority, and it is sitting in the public record right alongside the contempt resolution, the watchdog investigations, and the looming May 29th date. We need to circle back to Representative Melanie Stansbury, because her statement about Bondi's potential testimony has not received nearly the attention it deserves. She stated on the record that Bondi repeatedly, over her entire term of service as the AG, engaged in manufactured lies to the American people over the Epstein case. That is a specific, devastating, and documented characterization from a sitting member of Congress. But she went even further. She said, "Based on what I've seen in the unredacted Epstein files, there are dozens of potentially prosecutable crimes and cases in the Epstein files, and they have not pursued a single investigation. Dozens of potentially prosecutable crimes, clearly visible in the unredacted Epstein files, not a single investigation pursued. Stansbury has personally reviewed unredacted Epstein files on the highly secure DOJ server. Her statement is based purely on what she personally reviewed with her own eyes. She is not speculating, she is accurately characterizing exactly what she read. The implications of that statement for May 29th are dangerously specific. If there are dozens of potentially prosecutable crimes sitting in the unredacted files, and if the Attorney General during whose tenure those files were tightly controlled pursued exactly zero investigations into them, then the massive question of why becomes completely central to the transcribed interview. Why were no investigations opened? What decisions were made about which leads to follow and which to intentionally leave alone? Who was consulted about those critical decisions? What was the exact basis for the determinations about what required investigation and what did not? Bondi will have to answer those questions. She was the Attorney General. She was ultimately responsible for the prosecutorial decisions of the Department of Justice. She cannot invoke the power of her office anymore. She cannot point to vague institutional constraints or pending matters as convenient reasons not to discuss specific decisions. She is a private citizen, and Stansbury's statement made on the record, based on personal review of the unredacted files, is the foundation for a line of questioning that has absolutely no clean deflection available. Dozens of potentially prosecutable crimes in the files. Not a single investigation pursued. Bondi was the Attorney General. May 29th is exactly when she has to explain why. Then there is Kash Patel. Kash Patel is still the FBI director. His documented record in this story is highly specific and connects directly to the nightmare Bondi will face on May 29th. The Wall Street Journal reported that Patel privately told officials that Trump's name is in the Epstein files. Yet, under oath before Congress, he blatantly refused to confirm whether Trump's name appears in the files. He stated publicly, "There is no credible information connecting Epstein to anyone other than Epstein himself," and he swore he had never spoken to the president about the Epstein files. Those diametrically opposed positions exist simultaneously in the documented record. The private statement reported by the Journal sits right next to the public statements made under the penalty of perjury. His connection to May 29th is deeply institutional. Patel and Bondi were the two most senior officials directly responsible for the FBI and DOJ's handling of the Epstein files. A formal watchdog complaint documented that only a handful of both of their communications appear in over 2 million released pages. Despite their central and heavily documented involvement in the entire release process, they worked together closely. Their communications with each other and with Blanche about what to release and what to bury are precisely what is largely absent from the released files. And the watchdog complaint about those highly suspicious missing communications is part of the documented record that will fuel the questions Bondi faces on May 29th. Furthermore, The Atlantic's explosive report on Patel, citing more than 24 sources, described him as erratic, often completely unreachable, and observed drinking to the point of intoxication around administration staff. His $250 million defamation lawsuit against the magazine is still pending. Ted Lieu stated publicly that Patel is next. Tucker Carlson said Patel was making a massive mistake by promising to reveal things and then failing to reveal them. His own deputy director, Dan Bongino, reportedly considered resigning over Patel and Bondi's outright refusal to release the full files. The man Patel personally chose as his number 2 at the FBI was so deeply troubled by the handling of the Epstein files that he actively contemplated walking away. All of that is documented. All of it sits in the exact same record as Bondi's upcoming testimony on May 29th, and the brutal questions Bondi faces about why specific files were completely withheld, why specific communications are magically absent from the record, and why no investigations were ever opened, despite what Stansbury described as dozens of potentially prosecutable crimes, will be heavily shaped by the documented record of what Patel was doing at the very same time. Bondi and Patel made these critical decisions together. She is in the room on May 29th. He is still at the FBI, and the record of both of them is exactly what the watchdogs are now meticulously examining. Waiting for her in that room is also Ted Lieu's complete, flawless record. Ted Lieu built a masterfully documented record across 5 consecutive hearings between September 2025 and February 2026. His methodology is specific and deadly. He identifies a statement, finds a hard document that contradicts or complicates it, asks a specific question in a hearing room, and notes permanently on the record when the question is not answered. Over 5 exhaustive hearings, that method produced a cumulative documented record that absolutely no single answer or clever deflection has resolved. At the September 2025 House Judiciary hearing, Lieu brilliantly established 2 foundational contradictions. He aggressively pushed Patel on whether the FBI had subpoenaed journalist Michael Wolff's taped interviews with Epstein. Patel claimed he did not know if the FBI had subpoenaed those critical tapes. The director of the FBI claimed he did not know whether his own agency had subpoenaed material in arguably the most significant sex trafficking case in American history. Liu then asked whether the FBI should subpoena the Epstein estate for materials, including photographs that Epstein allegedly showed Wolff. Patel casually responded that the estate was under no legal obligation to provide materials, even pursuant to a subpoena. Liu fired back. "That's just false. You're the freaking FBI." Both statements are locked in the permanent record. At the 11th of February 2026 House Judiciary hearing, Liu produced the exact exchange that led directly to a formal perjury accusation against Bondi. He presented footage of Trump and Epstein together. He asked Bondi a direct question about evidence. Bondi flatly stated, "There is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime." Liu then presented a 2-1-page internal DOJ slideshow summarizing witness testimony, a document released by the DOJ itself. He said directly on the record, "I believe you just lied under oath." Bondi snapped back. "Don't you ever accuse me of a crime?" She did not explain the glaring discrepancy. She did not retract the statement. She just aggressively challenged the accusation. On the 25th of February 2026, Liu and Goldman sent the formal perjury referral directly to Blanche. The referral identified the specific statement. It cited specific internal documents. It officially requested a special counsel. No special counsel was ever appointed. No formal response was ever issued. The referral simply sits like a loaded weapon in the permanent record. On May 29th, Leah's documented record is physically in the room in the form of transcripts, documents, and questions methodically built across 5 intense hearings. He will be among the members armed with the most developed, documented basis for specific questions. The pivotal question he previously asked that produced no answer, "Who was that promise made?" to referring to the infamous, as promised, late-night message, is still sitting in the record. It connects directly to Bondi because she was the Attorney General during the exact period when that message was sent. She was overseeing the department that Patel communicated with at 1014 at night, promising to put files under administrative review by morning. She was completely responsible. She has to comprehensively explain what May 29th is, what it isn't, and what it could ultimately produce. There is a vital correction in CNN's reporting about May 29th that every observer needs to understand before this interview happens. CNN issued a correction noting that a previous version of its story misstated exactly how Bondi will testify. She will sit for a transcribed interview rather than an under-oath deposition. That distinction is massive, and it matters. Here is what it actually means. A transcribed interview and an under-oath deposition are fundamentally different procedures. In an under-oath deposition, the witness is formally sworn in before their testimony begins. The oath creates a highly specific legal obligation and a specific criminal exposure for false statements. Perjury charges flow directly from under-oath testimony. A transcribed interview is still a formal congressional proceeding. It still produces a permanent record. The transcript can be released publicly. Statements made in it can be forensically compared against prior statements. And, critically, making knowingly false statements to Congress is still a federal crime under 18 U.S.C. 1001. Regardless of whether the witness was formally sworn in, that heavy statute covers material false statements made to any branch of the federal government in any matter within its jurisdiction. So, the transcribed interview is absolutely not consequence-free. It is not a casual conversation over coffee. It produces a permanent record, and it carries federal criminal exposure for false statements. But it is procedurally different from a formal deposition under oath. And that critical distinction will be highly relevant to exactly how Bondi's attorney advises her to answer specific, dangerous questions. What the transcribed interview can produce is specific, a permanent, documented record of Bondi's answers to specific questions about specific decisions made during her tenure. That record will be meticulously compared against prior statements, prior testimony, and prior internal documents. Any discrepancy between what she says on May 29th and what she has said before immediately becomes part of the public record. If she invokes privileges or blatantly declines to answer specific questions, those refusals are permanently documented. Garcia has stated unequivocally that all questions posed by members must be answered, and that the committee will compel her testimony if she refuses. Whether the committee actually has the immediate legal tools to strictly enforce that in the context of a transcribed interview, rather than a formal deposition, is a genuine legal question that will be brutally worked out in real time. On May 29th. What May 29th is not, it is not a trial. It is not a hearing with cameras and public viewing. It is a closed-door transcribed interview that will produce a record and that may or may not be made public depending entirely on committee decisions regarding what May 29th could produce. It is the first documented, sworn, or formally stated account from a former Attorney General of the United States about specific decisions made during her highly controversial tenure regarding one of the most high-profile accountability questions in recent American political history. That is what is truly at stake on May 29th. Not a verdict, but a permanent record. The bigger picture extends to the DOJ, the GAO, and what comes after. May 29th does not exist in isolation. It is part of a massive, documented accountability chain that now includes multiple parallel investigative processes. The DOJ Inspector General announced it was aggressively investigating the AG's compliance with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. That investigation is examining whether the DOJ complied with the law's strict requirements during the period when Bondi was Attorney General. It is internal to the DOJ. It is completely independent of the congressional process, and its findings, when they finally come, will be brutally measured against whatever Bondi says on May 29th. Senator Jeff Merkley, who led the Senate version of the Transparency Act, announced that the Government Accountability Office Congress independent watchdog will also relentlessly probe the DOJ's handling of the Epstein files. The GAO investigation is completely separate from the DOJ IG investigation. It is Congress' own watchdog examining the exact same period and the exact same decisions. Two watchdogs, two investigations, both looking at the exact same decisions made during Bondi's tenure, both producing explosive findings that will exist permanently alongside whatever transcript May 29th produces. The Democracy Defenders Fund watchdog complaint about missing communications also sits actively in the record. Only a handful of Bondi, Blanche, and Patel's communications appear in over 2 million released pages. The DOJ dismissed the allegation as a tired narrative, but the complaint is still there. Approximately 2.5 million pages identified by the DOJ as potentially responsive remain entirely unreleased. Massey's intense 30-day compliance warning to Blanche is highly documented and entirely public. The clock is running down. The prison guard on duty the tragic night Epstein died is still scheduled for a congressional deposition. The date remains uncertain. Kash Patel is still the FBI director. The Atlantic's devastating report is still standing. His $250 million lawsuit is still pending. The Wall Street Journal report that he privately told officials Trump's name is in the files sits in the record right next to his public statements, completely under oath. Bondi is now a private citizen facing a transcribed interview on May 29th. Her personal attorney is Harmeet Dillon, a current DOJ employee, which Garcia has explicitly noted raises documented, glaring conflict of interest concerns. Whether Dillon's dual role as Bondi's personal attorney and a sitting DOJ official affects the legal advice she gives and the exact answers Bondi provides is a massive question that sits unresolved in the record. Here is the complete documented picture of exactly where everything stands. 19 days before May 29th. Bondi ran from April 14th. Contempt was filed. 45 minutes later, she had absolutely no choice. May 29th is the undeniable product of a contempt resolution, not voluntary cooperation. Garcia said she has extensive personal knowledge. Khanna compared her dire situation to Clinton's. Stansbury said she engaged in manufactured lies, and that dozens of potentially prosecutable crimes sit entirely uninvestigated in the very files Bondi was directly responsible for. 2 watchdogs are actively investigating the same period. 2.5 million pages are still suspiciously missing. The communications of the 3 officials most responsible for the release are largely absent from the released files. Patel privately told officials Trump's name is in the files. Publicly, he declined to confirm it. The massive gap between those two things is the burning question underneath every single question on May 29th. And Leah's heavily documented record 5 intense hearings, 1 formal perjury accusation in writing, 1 documented explosive exchange where Bondi said, "Don't you ever accuse me of a crime instead of explaining." The discrepancy is waiting for her in that room, in the form of transcripts and documents and questions that have been building, like a pressure cooker for more than a year. May 29th is 19 days away from this recording. Bondi will be in that room. She will be a completely private citizen. She will have absolutely no office and no institutional protection, and she will have to say something about every single question in that heavily documented record. What she says will become part of a permanent, unerasable transcript. That transcript will be relentlessly compared against everything that came before it, and whatever the transcript ultimately shows, it will feed the next brutal phase of the accountability chain that has already produced 2 watchdog investigations. 1 contempt resolution, 1 firing with 4 simple words, and 1 documented moment of intense institutional reckoning that began exactly 45 minutes after Democrats put a contempt resolution in the public record. She ran from April 14th. May 29th is the day she cannot run from. Subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel covers every single development with verified sources and documented evidence. We will be here when May 29th happens, when the transcript is released, when the watchdog findings finally come, and when the next explosive phase of this story begins. Because this story does not end when someone sits down in a room. It ends when the questions finally get answered.